guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie and today I'm going to be giving you some book recommendations for Mentalhealthathon. If you don't know, Mentalhealthathon is a readathon that takes place during the month of May in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, and it is hosted by Nicole from A Beautiful Chaos of Books. If you're interested in participating, I will leave her announcement video down in the description. It has all of the readathon information, and if you haven't really thought about participating, I highly encourage you to do so. You still have time, and of course it takes place throughout the whole month, so you have plenty of time to read at least one book that features mental health. It's so important to read books that feature mental illness and other mental health conditions because not only do we need to reverse the stigma, but we also just need to educate ourselves. Discussions on mental health and mental illness are so relevant today. It's important to bring awareness to mental health and to see things from someone else's perspective who lives with a mental illness. And I think it's important to learn about mental illnesses that you're not really familiar with. And even with the mental illnesses that you are familiar with, I think it's important to debunk the stereotypes. With that being said, you should participate in Mentalhealthathon. I'm participating. I just released my TBR video if you want to watch it. So without further ado, here are some books that talk about mental health that I personally love and I recommend reading, whether it's for Mentalhealthathon or just in general. If you can't participate or you already have your TBR set or whatever, if you're just wanting to add more books to your TBR, this is a video that hopefully you can get something out of. First up, I have a very hard-hitting contemporary, and beware because I have lots of trigger warnings for this book, and that is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. This is one of the best, if not the best, mental health book I have ever read in my entire life, and it has the best PTSD representation that I've ever read before. I thought the PTSD representation in this book was very realistic, and I personally related to a lot of the PTSD elements in the story. This book follows a teenage girl who is about to enter into high school when she is raped by her brother's best friend, and this best friend is basically like part of the family, and she doesn't feel like she can open up and tell people about what happened to her because she doesn't think that anyone would believe her. This guy is like the picture perfect teenager, and because he's so close with her whole entire family, she just doesn't talk about what happened to her. She keeps it completely a secret. She doesn't tell anyone. This book does graphically show the rape scene, so obviously trigger warnings. If this is not something that you feel like you can read, please, by all means, skip this one. So this book follows the main character at the time of her initial abuse, but then it also follows her throughout each year of high school. It's really a heartbreaking but beautiful journey of her recovery and how she copes with what has happened to her, how she grows as a person. And it also just follows her daily struggles, not only with PTSD, but with things like how do you move on and start a relationship with someone when you're scared to be alone with that person. This is a realistic view into what life is like for someone who is a survivor of sexual assault. I completely love it. Highly, highly recommend. Next, if you want a book that features depression, I recommend If He Had Been With Me by Lauren Nolan. This is a YA hard-hitting contemporary that I have raved about on my channel over and over and over again, and I'm still raving about it because people still have not read it. This is a randomly obscure book that I found on Pinterest. So, I mean, who gets their book recommendations off of Pinterest? Apparently I do. This book took a while to grow on me, but I absolutely fell in love, and I need to reread it to see how I'd feel about it now. I read it about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and I think it's time for a reread. Honestly, I may read this for Mentalhealthathon if I had the time, if I complete my TBR. We'll see. This book is really hard to describe without giving everything away, but I'm going to try to give you a synopsis that has no spoilers. So this book follows two characters, a girl named Autumn and a boy named Finney, from the time they are infants to the time they are seniors in high school. Their moms are best friends. They're actually like sisters, and they're so close that they decided to get houses right next to each other and raise their children together. So Autumn and Finn were actually born within a month apart, so they're very close in age, and they were raised literally from the time they were infants all throughout high school, kind of like as family. They've always been close, they've always been best friends, but then something happens when they're in middle school that pulls them apart, and they kind of keep up appearances for their family. They act like siblings in front of their family. They still act like they're best friends in front of their family. But at school, they no longer speak to each other. They're in completely different friend groups. And their friends at school don't even realize that they know each other. But then at home, they're essentially like siblings. They're eating at each other's house every night for dinner. And their families have no idea that they're not even friends anymore. So this book follows their childhood, and it really glosses over their childhood, if I'm going to be honest, which is kind of where the book didn't really grip me at first, because it's like little snapshots of their childhood, and at that time you don't really care about the characters yet, you don't care what's happening, and you don't understand why any of this information is relevant, but I promise, keep reading and all of it suddenly becomes clear. And like I said, this book glosses over their childhood and then really focuses on their high school experience, so it follows each of the 4 years of high school, and it does focus on their family dynamics and how they keep up appearances for their family, but it mostly focuses on their separate lives, their separate friend groups throughout high school, and it's a beautiful story of how their friendship fell apart and then how their friendship comes back together again. And the reason why I'm recommending this book for depression representation is because Autumn has seasonal depression throughout high school. There are so many books that feature depression, but this is the only book I've read that features seasonal depression, which is just as important to discuss. This book also has a lot of hard-hitting topics, and honestly, I can't tell you the trigger warnings without spoiling the story, so I think I'll just leave all the trigger warnings in the description for all of these books. So if you're interested in a particular book but you're kind of wary about reading it because you don't know if you'll be triggered, just check the description, they'll be in there. Otherwise, I highly recommend you try and go to it without knowing more because it's just so good and I don't want you to be spoiled. I don't want to ruin the story for you. Another YA book that has great depression representation is This Song Will Save Your Life by Leila Sales. This book follows a teenage girl who has depression and she's a social outcast. She doesn't have friends. She has kind of a rocky home life, and in order to escape her situation, she likes to sneak out of the house at night and go for walks throughout the town. And one night on one of her walks, she discovers this underground dance club, and in this dance club scene she starts to find herself, she starts to make friends, and she actually decides to study to become a DJ. And being a DJ opens up this whole new world for her and instills in her a love for music, and it's her way of coping with her depression and what's going on in her life, and she finally feels like this is where she belongs. I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend it. Next, I have one of my most favorite books of all time, and that is Amy and Rodgers, A Big Detour by Morgan Madsen. This is a YA contemporary story following a teenage girl whose dad recently passed away in an accident, and she's really struggling in her grief. I personally related to this book a ton because I read it shortly after my own father passed away in an accident, so I completely related to the main character and the grief that is represented in this story. And although it is a cute, fluffy contemporary story, it definitely deals with the heavier topics of grief, which is why I'm including it in this video. This book follows the main character as she's on a road trip across country. Her mom is selling their family home and they are moving completely across the country because that's just her mom's way of coping with the death of her husband. And Amy is tasked with driving the family car all the way across country, but the problem is, since the accident, Amy still can't bring herself to drive a car. So they enlist the help of a family friend's son named Roger, and he drives Amy across country, and of course they take couple detours, and it's such a cute story. Oh my gosh, this is one of my most favorite books, but regardless of its cuteness and the road trip aspects, I really related to the main characters, so that's why I love it so much. Next, if you want a lighter mental health book, I recommend By Your Side by Casey West. This is a fluffy, cute YA contemporary story, but the main character has an anxiety disorder, and there's not a huge amount of anxiety representation in this, but it's there nonetheless. Essentially, this book follows two characters who vaguely know who each other are, but they've never really talked before, and they end up getting stranded together in a library for a weekend. They're locked in this library, they have minimal supplies, minimal food, and they have to try and get along because they don't particularly like each other. It's very cute, very adorable. It's Casey West. And then of course, like I said, it does have an anxiety disorder representation in it. The main character has an anxiety disorder and she has panic attacks, and she also takes medication for her anxiety. So if that's something that you're interested in reading about, if that's something that you also live with, you might can relate to this book, and it's also just a lighter, cute read. It's not very heavy. So if you're wanting to participate in Mental Health-athon, but you don't really want to read doom and gloom books, that's my thing, but that's not everyone's thing. If you want to participate but you want something light, I recommend this one if you like YA contemporary. And lastly, I want to recommend Stronger Than You Know by Joanne Perry. This is another obscure book that I think I found off of Pinterest. I've only seen one other person on YouTube read this book, so honestly, it's not written that great, but the story itself is what makes this book good. This book follows a teenage girl named Joy who has been abused her whole entire life. All kinds of abuse, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child abuse, you name it, she's been through it. She has lived with her mom her entire life, but she's basically like imprisoned. She's not allowed to leave the house, and none of the neighbors even know that she exists. She is burned, she is beaten, she is raped, sometimes gang raped. She has to sneak around at night to eat food because she can't let her mom find out that she ate. It's just a completely horrific, awful situation that she's in. But at the start of this book, she is rescued and she is sent to live with her aunt and uncle, and she's really just trying to start life. She's never really experienced life outside of her home, outside of the awful situation that she was in. She doesn't really know how to socialize. She doesn't really know how to behave without being scared of everything, everyone around her. She lives with severe PTSD, as you can imagine. And this book is all about her recovery, how she copes with her anxiety, her PTSD, her panic attacks. And it's about her learning to trust people, learning to trust her family, learning that not all men are evil, learning that not all people are evil. This book deals with so many topics that I feel like are completely untouched in literature. Like I said, it's not the best written book, but I think it's an important read nonetheless. Alright, those are all the books that I'm going to be recommending to you guys today. I hope you participate in Mentalhealthathon. If you are, let me know in the comments down below what books you are planning to read. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more bookish content by me. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.